Welcome to our second Domestic Violence Awareness Month panel discussion on the red flags of domestic violence. My name is Michelle Mittmeyer, and I'm a worker for domestic violence practice at North Suburban Legal Aid Clinic. And I'm joined here tonight by a fantastic panel that I would love to introduce. We have Maritza Carvajal, the bilingual medical and legal advocate for Northwest Center Against Sexual Assault. We have Mike Feinerman, the director for the Center for Advancing Domestic Peace. And we have Ornella, the social services manager for CommunityHealth. All right, so we are going to, I'm so sorry, we're going to jump right into it. Thank you so much for joining us here tonight. And I'm going to start with my first question. You each work with very different populations. So I would love to hear about your understanding of the red flags of domestic violence, how that translates to the populations you serve, and then the kinds of unique barriers and risk factors that the populations you serve faces. Who would like to take it first? How about Ornella? Oh, just turned her mute off.
I'm sorry. Yes, so like she mentioned, my name is Ornella Raceto, and where I work at CommunityHealth, we serve an adult patient population, primarily immigrant, primarily undocumented, and I just give that as a little bit of a background of who I primarily work with, day to day, but also very important because I myself am foreign-born. I'm from Lima, Peru, so I'm serving my community when I am at CommunityHealth, and it's not just, these are my patients, these are the clients that we serve, but, it is speaking to the intrinsic problems that I also see in Latin American culture, and I can only really speak for this in relation to my patients, but I feel that it also applies to so many. And I would say, for me, the earliest red flag, and I know this is not specific to the folks that I work with, is just the red flag of the culture that you are brought up in, which perpetuates this idea, which I hear sadly so often, of, well, I have to stay because I'm expected to stay because this is who I chose. So if you're growing up with that, right, since childhood, of like, you stay with who you have to stay with because it's just how you do it, right? You don't even have that conscious understanding when you're a child of like, this is just how the world works. So it's not even a red flag. It's just, this is how the world functions. And that really sets us all up in a bad place because it sets us up to tolerate things we otherwise wouldn't, because everyone around us, as we've been growing up for so many years, is like, well, this is just how it is. So in many ways, I would say the red flags come during childhood, because this is just what we are taught, and what we see and what we hear, and we just accept it as it happens to be, whether or not it touches our lives. But of course, it becomes an even clearer red flag, a burning red flag, when it, of course, touches us personally as we get older. And I would say probably the easiest to see, but in many ways also the easiest to ignore, I would say, are just what I would call like light controlling behaviors of just even, can I see your phone? Let me know where you're going, which of course would be a very simple, oh yeah, I'm going to go see my friend. But there's also just like, how often is this particular thing being asked of you? So just the small things, because the path to domestic violence is in fact paved with controlling cobblestones. So, it's this idea of just the little flags of just control, period. It doesn't have to appear with malice, but I would say that's the first one that I always, advise folks to just be on the lookout for, because this is how things begin. And touching on the barriers and risk factors, I would say it's two main ones of so many. I would say one is financial dependence, or perceived financial dependence, which I typically correct, because I often ask, what would you do if something happened to this person that you feel you can't be without? And they say, well, I don't know, because we oftentimes come into situations where someone leaves, someone is deported, someone is in jail, someone is in the hospital, someone passes away, and it's, yeah, people still continue, people still go on. So it's always, challenging the perception of, I cannot do this by myself. And for most of the folks that I know, it really comes down to financial stressors. Particularly with my older clients that I work with, and I do see this oftentimes in older folks as well, just this idea of things are the way they are, and it would cause more distress to change the situation. Like, this is the stress that I know, and so I just choose to live with this because the stress of the unknown seems worse to me. So I'll take this, this devil that I know versus the unknowing of, will I have anyone? Will I have anyone to talk to, even if it's not a good talking, right? So I feel that those are two main risk factors of just, again, the financial, and also what worst thing can I expect if I choose to change my present thing?
Right, absolutely. And I really like that you touched on the patterns being the thing that is the common thread. And to our other panelists, is there anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think Juanela spoke like a lot of truths that culturally, we're supposed to follow these norms, and we see it from when we're kids. So it's kind of like it's embedded in us already. So I think that's definitely very true. I am Maritza. I work with Northwest CASA. We're Northwest Center Against Sexual Assault. So the population that I work with is survivors of sexual assault, sexual violence. And I think I would say even a barrier is the idea that your significant other, that your partner cannot be your perpetrator when it comes to sexual assault or to sexual violence, that you're supposed to, if you're uncomfortable with something that's going on, then you shouldn't speak up about it. And I don't think that's true. It's not true. And I think that's something that, sexual violence is a branch of domestic violence. And I think that's often a little bit overlooked because it's an intimate thing and it's not commonly talked about. So that's something that I would say. I wrote out so many talking points. But another thing is the lack of consent. So that's one thing that I think is really important, is that sometimes there's a misunderstanding of what consent can be and what it is, that, again, it's not talked about, that it should be.
I completely understand. And that's another thing that I would really love to explore tonight is the beliefs that lead to abuse as well, which I've also discussed with Mike a little bit. And Mike works with abusers. Mike, can you offer any perspective on that in terms of your understanding of red flags and barriers and risk factors? Oh, Mike, I believe you're on mute.
I think I responded more about beliefs, but one of the things that I can say is that from talking to both survivors and to people who have harmed, I would say that among the red flags that a person might see early in a relationship are things like, is the person that you're dating rude or dismissive or condescending to other people, waitresses, clerks in stores, and so on? I think that's a serious red flag. I think that the way that someone treats other people can give you a hint as to how he's going to treat you when he's in a situation where he values you less. I think you can also think about the way that he relates to your family. Is he reluctant to be with them, but wants you to be with his family or be with him? Does he make comments about your friends that indicate that he doesn't want to spend time with them? Does he have friends? I think that's a really important red flag. If somebody does not have a lot of friends, then they don't have a lot of people in their lives that they can get feedback from. I think all of us need people who can give us feedback about what's going on in our life and our relationship. And I think that's the way that friends communicate. And if you're lacking that, I think it makes it difficult to have a healthy relationship with someone, because you're depending on them for your companionship and for their opinion of you and so on. And I think what Ornella and Maritza were talking about really, in many ways, goes to what the beliefs are that we have. You know, when I first started doing this work, I co-facilitated a group at Haymarket Center with Lawana Weathers, who was an older woman who for many years had been the domestic violence minister at Salem Baptist Church. And there's an exercise that we do in our program about halfway through, where participants will examine what they consider to have been their most violent incident. The incident where they caused the most harm or were most abusive to an intimate partner. And Lawana, when someone was doing that exercise, she would wait until the point when they were just about to describe that most violent act. And she would ask them, okay, stop right there for a minute. What would have happened if your grandma walked in? And almost always people would say, I would stop. And she would use that as a teaching moment to make it clear to people that this is why we say that what we're doing is not anger management, because you can manage your anger just fine when grandma comes in, or when the police come, or when you're angry at the boss or at a judge. The question then isn't, how do I manage my anger? The question is, what are the beliefs that I have that lead me to the conclusion that I don't have to manage my anger with my partner in this instance? And they can be beliefs about what it means to be a man. Very often that's high among the list. Sometimes it's what their beliefs are about women, about their partner in particular. But we need to unpack those things before we can help them to take a look at what's behind the pattern of behavior.
Right, and I absolutely agree. I think that that's so critical to understand, is that this is not an issue of anger management. And you talked about underlying beliefs, which I would really love to explore, because the question that so frequently comes up when discussing abuse is, you know, why does this person stay? Which is so harmful to survivors, because it really puts the responsibility on them to stop the abuse. So let's take a look at the other factors, like beliefs, that really contribute to abuse. So you mentioned beliefs. Do you think that there are any other factors that really lead someone to harm? And how do you feel like our society really contributes to these belief systems?
Well, one of the ways that our society contributes to the dynamics of domestic violence is by teaching people, and it teaches all of us really, that power works. That if you make someone afraid of you, they'll do what you want to do, and they won't do what you don't want them to do. And we learn this from the police. We learn this sometimes from teachers. We learn it from the church in some instances, or our religious institution. We learn it from prisons, from many of the institutions in our society, which focus more on obedience than they do on choosing behavior because it's good for you and good for the people around you. And I think in many cases we have to think about the behavior of people who harm as strategic. Yes, it may be influenced to some extent by the fact that they have been oppressed, by the fact that they have been harmed. But what our job is to acknowledge that and to talk to them about what they have or haven't done to heal from that, and then to refuse to collude with them in using that as an excuse for harming others. Oliver Williams at the University of Minnesota does really good work about this. He talks about the difference between acknowledgement and collusion. I can't walk into one of our groups in Chicago where I'm probably going to be the only white person in the room and talk to people with a straight face about their oppression of their partners without acknowledging that they've been oppressed too. And when they come in and they say, oh, what I did to her ain't nothing compared to what I deal with on the streets every day, I have to acknowledge that they may be telling the truth about that, but that's also not an excuse for subjecting their partner, who also suffers from many of the same things that oppress them, to continue to oppress her. And part of what we have to do, I think, is to challenge our participants to develop a vision for what they want their life to be like. Do you want to continue to live in a power struggle? Or do you want to think about what might happen if you could develop a partnership? What could you do? What could happen if instead of struggling against this person who's your most natural ally, you were to really ally with this person who is your most natural ally, against the things that are oppressing you both? What could happen for your family, for your community, for our country? And some of the guys get that right away. They see the wasted energy. They can realize that, all of it, just figuring out where someone is, who she's talking to, who's calling her, who's texting her, where she was when she didn't come home on time. That's exhausting. It takes an awful lot of energy.
Absolutely.
And we can challenge our participants to think about what might happen if you channel that energy not into struggling against her, but into figuring out how the two of you can work together so that you're both feeling safe and happy. What would that be like? What might that do for you and for your children and for your partner?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ornella and Marita, can you speak about that as well? Factors, belief systems that might contribute to abuse, how society contributes to that, etc.
Do you want to go, Maritza? Would you like me to go? Okay. So one of the things I feel is also, let's say, for example, early on in certain relationships, it's, if you're doing something and your partner is still there, is with you, it kind of, in many ways cut up the ante of, well, I got away with it once, what else can I do? How else can I further express my rage and my anger and have my partner accept this? So, because in many ways, if she or he, right, is allowing me to check their password and do this and follow them when they're going out with friends, what else can I also do that I may want to? Because if this was allowed, what else? Is there a limit to what I can and cannot do? Because as I'm sure we all know, things just continue to aggravate and worsen, over time. It doesn't go from 0 to 100 with the first, incident. And I feel with societal structures and how that contributes to it, I feel honestly that that's probably one of the main things that, I speak so often to folks who say, yeah, but I've called the police. I've called them so many times. People say, and they told me that they were going to lock me up for defending myself, or they told them to just take a walk around the block. When you think of systems of power and you think of them being dominated by men, that doesn't give you faith that the system is going to be there to protect women. And I say that just because oftentimes, more often than not, it is, women who are victims of violence. But, with this, it's the stories that people go through, the stories that people hear, the experiences rather that people go through, the stories that they hear, if nothing else, they enable, that belief of like, why seek help? My family doesn't want to help me because I've turned them away, and my friends also don't want to reach out because I've turned them away. And the option I may have now is, seeking, justice perhaps. But knowing how the justice system fails us repeatedly, why reach out? I feel just, and this is not specific to Chicago or Illinois, I would say worldwide, the systems of power have never done enough of a job to protect women, or just protect survivors and protect victims, which is concerning on many levels. But again, it just reinforces this of, well, are they going to believe me? Are they, and not just believe me, but are they going to protect me? Because also, just if we think of, the punishment, if someone can post bail and then come out and do further harm, then you really don't have reason, right? Many people believe, to then go out, because now I will face possible further violence, right? Because this person now has the ability to look for vengeance because of what I did. So in many ways, I feel that the structures that would be there to protect are not seen as protective factors. If anything, it's like, this would be my last option, because I've seen what it has done to other women, and I don't want to be in that same position. I'd rather just try to handle things my way, and hope for the best, which I would say is just a larger issue of just how folks, and particularly minority communities, see, right, the legal justice system and the police, of just like, these are not entities that we necessarily see that are there to serve and protect us. If anything, they're often there, and the media has shown it, to punish us in truly egregious ways. So there's already just not that, unfortunately, belief that these structures can, support victims and survivors in the way that they would want.
100%. Maritza?
I think one of the societal structures that kind of, especially with younger folks, is social media that plays into, the way that accepting this sort of toxic relationship, that it's okay to check people's phones, that it's okay to, it's okay to share your location because Snapchat has that feature. So that's what we should be doing. But I think the way that, society and how we're so addicted to our phones and our apps, it almost becomes, they're giving perpetrators, they're giving us more abilities to be vulnerable to violence.
Mm-hmm.
That was another question that I had tonight, and now that you brought it up, I'd really love to ask it. So smartphones, social media, like you just said, it's made it easy, not just easier, but I love that you said more acceptable, to track a person's whereabouts and to monitor them. So can you talk a little more about electronic abuse, what red flags of electronic abuse are, and really what a person should do if they feel like they're being abused?
I think definitely, like I said, like a lot of these apps have the ability to track your location. iPhones, I know, have the ability to track, your different friends. And it seems very innocent. And I think it can be a very innocent thing, to share it with a friend, just so someone knows your whereabouts at all times. But when it becomes something that I see you left work and it usually takes you 10 minutes, but now you've taken 20 minutes to get home. And, those text messages come in, those calls come in of, what's taking you so long? Where are you? Where did you go? It becomes unhealthy.
Would anyone like to add to that? Some other red flags of electronic abuse, ways that people can protect themselves, safety measures that people should maybe take if they feel like Maritza was saying, like that boundary gets crossed, or even where that boundary should be. What is that boundary?
Well, I think there's so much social pressure for people to allow anyone who is dating them to be their friend on Facebook or Snapchat or Instagram. And I'm sorry that that's the case, because I think a little more discernment about when you want to give that kind of access to someone in your life. You know, many of the people who don't think twice about doing that would cringe if they knew that their parents had the same access. You know, I think that should be a warning. You know, if you don't want your parents to know what you're doing, are you sure you want this person that you've just started dating to know everything that you're doing? To be able to track you 24/7, 365? And maybe I'm stating the obvious here, but I think it's worth mentioning that almost all of these systems and methods of communication were developed by men. And they were not developed with the kinds of built-in safeguards for women that I think a thoughtful person might have recommended.
That's an excellent point. Ornella, any thoughts on electronic abuse, how to stay safe, things that we should consider?
You know, one thing I often mention, in the situation where I have someone who has left the same apartment, the same house, and left the situation, who knows for how long, but hopefully a very, very long time, I always let them know to, even if it risks losing their phone, to immediately cut off anything that their partner would have access to. And primarily it comes down to phone accounts, because oftentimes people have, you know, shared plans. I myself am not a big fan of technology, so I'm not sure of all the verbiage. Shared plan, family plan, not sure. I was in grad school when I got my first cell phone, so I'm dating myself here with how not good I am with technology. But it's, you know, tracking, and it's not limited to phones. It can be just, you know, my internet account and all of those things. Just, you know, whoever pays for the thing has access to the thing, right? Whoever pays controls whatever you are using, and to just be mindful of that. And also, and this is kind of along the lines when we often tell our clients to, you know, if you have important documents, make sure that they're somewhere safe. I would also encourage, because I know so very few people do this. I know I myself, I don't know of many people who still memorize phone numbers, and I'm sure that very few of us could list like the phone numbers of our 10 closest contacts. But because we don't do that, I feel it's so necessary to make sure that you have a written down list of who those contacts are, and that someone has that list. Because if your phone is broken, taken, if that information is, you know, cleared, what are you going to do? We don't often necessarily think of just having a paper copy of all of our contacts, but that's something that I also recommend, and having that along with, like, let's say, important documents for someone else to hold. And I err on the side of saying, oh, you know, just it's easier to put in your computer. But again, if someone has access to your account, that does you no good. So an actual paper copy of that information as well, because I feel that a lot of people sometimes may not even know their parents' numbers nowadays, and which is very concerning, even, like, you know, close by numbers, because we, you know, as technology advances and we get used to these shortcuts, there's a lot of really important things that we lose with those shortcuts, including just knowing who to call, because we've become so accustomed to just, you know, pressing their name on the phone.
That is an excellent point. Especially what you said about storing things virtually if your partner has access to them. And to Mike's point about many of the apps being designed by men, one of the things that is a resource for people who are being abused, there are apps actually that make it a little bit easier and safer to store different documents and things like that, that has those safety measures, that had women's input, where things are encrypted and kept a little bit safer. But I absolutely agree that having a paper copy of everything, numbers, things like that, is a fantastic idea. One of the first things that we mentioned tonight was types of abuse that aren't really considered, perhaps by the, our culture or society or whatever neighborhood that we're living in. A lot of people picture outbursts, bruises, hitting as the first things when they think of domestic violence. So what do you feel are the red flags or types of domestic violence that often get ignored on a larger scale or even the smaller scale among the clients that you serve?
I think Michael's talking, but he may be on mute.
Yeah, there we go. One of the tactics we sometimes hear about are people who have been verbally abusive to their partners in ways that they try to make a joke of. And sometimes that includes belittling them, trying to make them feel bad about themselves, and then laughing. And then when their partner gets upset, they say, "Oh, you're just too sensitive." I think, just to go back to something that you were talking about, Michelle, I think one of the things that people might want to consider is, how do you safeguard your financial life? I think having a lock on your credit reports and your credit status is a really wise thing to do, probably for everyone, but certainly for if you're in a new relationship and you're not certain about whether or not your partner is trustworthy yet. Financial abuse is a lot more common than people realize. And there are all kinds of economic abuse. One other that I've heard perpetrators talk about is making their partner dependent on them by going to their place of work and causing a scene repeatedly, so that finally the employer just gets tired of it and fires their partner, and the partner then has to rely on the abusive partner for support.
I agree. That's incredibly smart. Ornella or Maritza?
I think something that Michael said earlier was, when you interact with your partner, and how are they talking to the waitress? How are they talking to this cashier? And that's going to reveal so many little red flags that, aren't bruises, that aren't so much visible, but that you can, visible in the sense that you'll be able to hear them and hopefully be able to pick up on them. But I think especially that isolation from your friends and family is one that they're isolating you from your support system, and they're the only person that you have left. And like I said, my role is primarily sexual violence. So I would always say that gut feeling that you're left with, if that's something that happens after a sexual encounter with your partner and it's unsettling, then, listen to that.
100%. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say that, just paying attention to comments that your partner makes. If they're making comments that are sexist or that are disrespectful of people's ethnicity or race, I think we need to take those seriously. One of the people that I learned from a lot in this program used to say, when people tell you who they are, believe them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I'm sorry, Ornella. took over. But I think another thing that, you know, when people are saying things that they're doing things out of love, or they're doing things because they love you, because they care for you, which may be their way of showing that, but that doesn't mean that that's okay.
That was the first thing that popped into my head when you were both talking about this, was this concept of gaslighting. You know, telling someone, no, I meant this by that, and kind of making someone question their sanity. It seems like that's also an underlying theme. Ornella, would you like to go for it?
I would say, you know, I'm a mental health clinician, and in the clinic, I so often get, you know, just counseling referrals, and sure enough, in many cases, it is because of, you know, years of depressive symptoms and anxiety-based symptoms arising from violence during childhood, right? Violence in different stages of the life cycle. And one of the things that is very often apparent in many cases that I've noticed is also when someone has a partner, and when I'm asking about their support system, they don't mention their partner as being supportive, though I know they have a partner, and having absolutely no other supports. Knowing those two factors alone, although we shouldn't make assumptions, I can begin to make a lot of connections, because again, this is someone who's being referred for depressive symptoms possibly, and I have, you know, again, very little info to go off of, but knowing those two things, that they have a partner who they are with, that they're not citing as their support, and also having no support system, period, because that lets me know if this is the one person that you have who is also not a support, what are you getting from this person? That is a massive red flag. I would say a lack of a supportive environment is a red flag in and of itself. But when you're saying that and you are in a relationship, like that's just very, right, that's just sad. That's very concerning, even if you're not in an abusive relationship, that you are not able to go to your partner for the support that you seek. Not abusive, but I would say that is a negligent relationship, which is, again, different from abuse, but it's like, there is something to that. And I think that is a very clear red flag. And if there was, I would say, one question that I wish more, for example, medical providers would ask their patients is, who is your support system? What is your support system? And oftentimes simply explaining what that means, because oftentimes people don't, like if you ask for friends and family, you may have family, but they may not be supportive, right? So it's just, you know, because that really does tell us so much about the situation that that person finds themselves in. Even if it's not that, you know, oh, this is why they're suffering, but we already know that when someone is going to go through a hard, you know, through hardship, they're not going to have any supports, and they will need support at that point in time.
Absolutely. This wasn't actually scheduled, but now I'm really interested to hear your perspective on it too. Do you feel like talking about red flags, how does that start? The isolation. What are the earliest red flags in terms of isolating that you've seen before? Because as we know, this is all a process. It's not just immediately saying you're not allowed to hang out with your friends anymore, you're not allowed to see your family anymore. So how do you feel that starts in the beginning?
I feel how it often starts is someone is sold this bill of goods of, I am the greatest thing ever. Why would you want to be with anyone but me? I can buy you things and take you to the movies. We'll go to all the restaurants you want to go to. Like, I can give you everything. But as we all know, just because someone can give you everything doesn't mean you want everything from that one person, right? Let's spread it out, right? You know, I want things for my friends and for my coworkers and for my partner and for my family, right? When someone is, you know, telling you like, I can be your everything, well, that's just not healthy. This is why people exist, because no one person should be the everything for another person. And if someone is trying to sell you on that idea, well, one, not only is that incorrect, but that's unhealthy. And I oftentimes use the healthy versus unhealthy because, you know, what is good for me is not good for someone else, and what is bad for someone else is not bad for me. But I would say, for the most part, universally, we know what is healthy and unhealthy. Whether we choose to stay in it or not is a different story, but we can understand what is healthy and unhealthy. And I feel that most people, as they really think about it, will come to the conclusion of, wait a minute, that's right. You can't have everything riding on that one person, because if that one person goes away, what happens to my everything? It goes away as well. And so, if, as you begin to kind of, rationalize why that's not healthy, it's like, oh, that makes sense, right? But I feel that very early on, I can be your everything. Well, no. I mean, yes, they can try to be, but we all know that that's not how it ends up.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. Maritza or Mike, can you comment more on that, on what that isolation looks like in the beginning versus further into the relationship, or anything else, how it might look at the beginning of a relationship?
Sometimes at the beginning of the relationship, a partner who doesn't have much of a social or affectional life will sulk or pout when their partner is doing things or is meeting with friends. I think that's a sign that there's something wrong there. There's an imbalance that, if it can't be corrected, is probably a sign of a relationship that is not healthy. And I guess one of the things that I would always caution people to consider is, if you have if you're considering dating or having a relationship with someone who doesn't have many friends, ask yourself why they don't have many friends.
Very true. Maritza, would you like to share any thoughts on that?
Well, I would just add that at the beginning of a relationship, it almost may feel like innocent or like a coincidence that this person either schedules things when they know you have something else going on. And then again, they're doing it on purpose, and eventually that group of friends, that group of family is going to begin to get frustrated and almost give up and say, well, you know what, you're going to spend your time with this person anyway, so why am I going to invite you? And again, that's just benefiting that perpetrator.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that. Extremely valuable insight. I really appreciate it. The next question that I wanted to ask is, making that decision to leave an abuser. It's, as we know, it's not linear. It's a process. Sometimes people might feel more ready to leave an abuser. Other times they backtrack. And one of the most important parts of that process is really recognizing abuse as abuse. So how do we meet, in Mike's work, the abuser, or in Ornella and Maritza's work, the person who is being abused? How do we meet them in that process, particularly in recognizing abuse as abuse?
I know I just mentioned that sometimes, family and friends can give up, and, they get frustrated with that person because they see red flags, but that person may not. So I think one thing is being supportive and constant support. So again, just because they're not ready to leave there and then, or when we ask them to continue that support and have them know, like, that's okay. I'm here for you if you ever want to talk, creating a safe space, not only to talk, but eventually, hopefully, safety planning with them, so that they feel comfortable to come to you.
Absolutely. Ornella, would you like to add to that?
Yes, and I would also say, part of that process of when, someone is deciding, should I go? Does this mean that, this is as bad as it's going to get, or is it going to get worse? In their process, one of the things that inevitably is popping up is also, okay, if I decide to go and that's what I go with, what is there? Like, what is the process? And even though we all know, right, as service providers, we all know the services out there. I would say that, like, with the general populace, I would say at most, I feel people only have an understanding of there is this thing that is a hotline that I can call, but it ends there. Right? People like I feel, well, not we as service providers, because I know that we try to spread the word as much as we can, but I would feel that, you know, states and city governments can do a better job of not just giving out the hotline, because a hotline does not let someone know what is the process that is there to help them through after they call that number. Because if all you're being told is, well, call this number, they'll help you. I don't know what that means. Like, what does help mean? You're telling me to call a number. Like, is someone going to tell me where to go and what to do and help me get my kids to school? Right. I feel that if people had more awareness, like if there was just more awareness of not just there is this hotline, but with this hotline, you will get assistance with A, B, C, D, E. And if that were on the poster and in commercials and, you know, public service announcements, I feel that would be so much more helpful, because we all know that one of the reasons that it's not what people choose to stay, but what prevents them from leaving is that. It's like, right, like, how will my Thursday be if I don't have a car, if I don't have a home, right? It's like, how will life continue to function? Because we all know that oftentimes, right, decisions are made in the moment of like, I am fearing for my life. I literally have to go. But, you know, it doesn't need to be that way. It can be made in those moments of, physically I am okay now, but I am in a place where I feel that I can go. However, where do I go to? What do I go to? And I feel when someone is in a situation of like, you know, getting closer to leaving, but still the unknown of what is there, because they really don't know, can I stay somewhere for several months? Is someone going to be able to, you know, help pay for my school while I'm doing this, right? All of those things that, you know, those unknowns, I feel that is why people end up deciding, well, right now is just not the right time. Like, I'm going to wait, save up some money, and then leave. But, you know, as I mentioned a bit ago, it's that I feel that perceived, right, inability of, you know, it's not financial dependence, but it's perceived that, or it's the perceived, I can't do it. Not that someone can, because I really truly believe everyone can. In the sense of there will be supports to help. Things may not be great and rosy and wonderful in the beginning. It will be difficult. It will be a struggle, but you know, that is reality. But I feel that it is possible, but we also need to make sure that people are aware of what we mean when we say, you know, there are resources and services to help you, because that is just such a general phrase that it doesn't translate to actual belief of like, you know what, she's right. There are services that can help me, because we don't really give them more than that.
I think part of the effect of that is that there are many people who know, for example, that they can get an order of protection, and they may have some idea of what the process is, but they don't know what to expect when they get to court. And they get to court and they have to wait quite a while to see an advocate, then they have to wait quite a while to see an assistant state's attorney, and then, oops, it's time for me to go and pick up my kids. And so a lot of women kind of cut their losses and will go to 18th and Clark, or 1800 North Clark, and get a civil order at the Daly Center, which is a valid order of protection, but it's much harder to enforce. You know, yes, if someone violates the order, technically they've committed a crime, just like a criminal order. But in order for the judge to become aware of the fact that they've violated the order or are not following the order, the plaintiff has to go back into court and file a motion for rule that the respondent show cause that he or she should not be held in contempt of court. And that's a fairly complicated pleading in a situation where most plaintiffs are acting pro se. They don't have an attorney. And there's not a lot of help in civil court for how to navigate that. So if you can have, as in addition to that, some support in shelter or in a walk-in program that can help you to know what to expect when you get to court, and to help you to think through the logistics. Who's going to pick up my kids? What happens if I have to wait for this? If I do go to civil court, is there a legal advocate or somebody who can help me to know what I need to know for that? Because otherwise, and the other thing is that in civil court, judges almost never order respondents to go to a partner abuse intervention program. They just don't. They don't like the sanction because they don't have a probation department. They have to monitor it themselves, or the plaintiff has to monitor it. They don't have anyone who can, they don't have status calls and things like that. So I know that Judge Patty was trying to change that. I don't think he was entirely successful. And I don't know if Judge Vega is doing anything about that right now.
And I think just regardless,
but that's another challenge that women face.
Well, I would say regardless of courthouse, the system is not victim-centered. So
it's not.
It offers, multiple challenges, whether that's the judge or whether that's who's going to help me with this order. And right now with COVID, are there people at the courthouse? Is the clerk's office even open? It's just not victim-centered.
Right.
That's another point that I'd like to discuss. I know we only have a few minutes left, but since the beginning of the COVID pandemic, we've seen this dramatic increase in domestic violence related phone calls. Our own clinic, we've had, I think it's a 44% increase in calls. So what can we as a community do better to respond to survivors right now? What special considerations do we need to take?
I think something that Ornella was talking about is not just offering your hotline, but giving more specifics as to what is the step-by-step, what can we do, so that people are more informed when they're, if they're calling the hotline, it's not maybe for asking just general services, it's okay, I'm ready to take this first step, how can we do that? So I think that would be one thing that would be extremely beneficial for survivors. And I think also outreach and, there's never enough outreach done to really inform communities and people of what services are out there.
Absolutely. And, and I can speak to social services, but the amount of time that it takes to access services and resources, if people don't really know their stuff, it can really cause you to lose faith in the system. And that's just another barrier. Can anyone else speak to that? COVID, resources, anything else?
I want to say that I'm pretty sure this is already known, but a lot of victims are also happen to be also primarily caregivers to children who are also at home. And I don't know if any school district is doing this, but knowing full well that it is oftentimes primarily, mothers who are helping kids at home, if trying to utilize any of those, remote resources to kind of put coded language around this, just like even something as simple as like if there's a weekly thing that is sent to all the parents, knowing that there may be a lot of, victims who are getting this, just putting some extra information, because I feel that, even folks who are, connected, they know the resources. I feel this time with the stress, people who would have thought, well, that's not, I'm fine, I have my job and I have this and, everything is okay. But being stuck at home, the kids are stuck at home, the stress is very high at home, things are just bubbling and they're really surfacing. And that is, of course, now having a lot of people who truly just do not know of services because they've never had to utilize these services, really just not knowing what is even out there. Because again, I feel that a lot of us, or not us, but a lot of people think well, the hotline is there for the real problem situations, rather than, no, it doesn't have to be like you're physically fleeing, right? Someone who is beating you and you are bloody and you have to leave. It's no, the hotline is there for so many other reasons, right? Support services are there for so many things. I mean, most of the victims that I work with, they are not being, physically beaten, right? It is primarily emotional abuse and, psychological abuse and verbal abuse, and decades of this. So it's just, people understanding when we say hotline and help, it is for all types of help. And I oftentimes really explain to people, like, it's just counseling help, just talking to someone, not I need to flee help necessarily, which I feel that a lot of people just go to that extreme because, that's what we see, in TV and in movies. You don't necessarily see someone just checking in with their domestic violence counselor of, hey, how are things going this week? Right? We don't see that because it's kind of, tame. Instead, you see the extreme situations of someone seeking help.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mike, do you have anything you'd like to add?
The only thing I can add to that is that, if people who have been using harm make a decision that they want to change, and that sometimes does happen, they can also call the hotline. The hotline has referred a number of people to us, and as well as to other programs in the area. I also want to encourage people to let victims know that if they're not able to get the help or the service that they feel that they need from the state hotline, they should try some of the local hotlines. CAWC, for example, has its own hotline, and I think Family Rescue and several of the other victim service programs also have that. I don't know about the northern suburbs. I think a Safe Place in Waukegan has one. And I'm not sure about Between Friends or the Evanston Y. I think the YMCA has a hotline as well. But they may have a more specific idea of what's available in a particular community, and they may also know people to ask for.
And we are almost finished for tonight. But before we go, I just have one last question. If there are any particular resources that you all feel are valuable, or anything else you'd like to add to this conversation in terms of what you feel people should know about red flags of domestic violence.
There is one thing, not a red flag, but a particular resource, and it is the single most important resource I tell our medical providers when they're coming on board to the clinic to know about, and I do a little spiel about it, is if anyone is working with immigrant populations, to please know and know very well about the U visa.
Yes.
The U visa has been a savior for so many. Sadly, they've had to need the U visa, of course, but it has been a savior for so many of our patients, and it is just a phenomenal program. Very long wait. It is not a perfect program, but I would encourage, if you're not familiar with the U visa, to please, T visa as well, to just do a little bit of work. There's a lot of information out there, but again, if you work with immigrant communities, and not even in domestic violence, it is particular to violent crimes, to just do a little bit of homework and to please spread the word, because so often I encounter folks who found out about it, of course, well after the fact, but luckily we're able to get connected to legal counsel for this.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Anything else quick, Maritza or Mike, that you'd like to add?
One resource that I know our agency often refers to, just to for younger folks to identify unhealthy and healthy relationship is the One Love Foundation. So that's a really great resource. And then also just that everyone's story matters. So I know sometimes it's hard to feel like you have a voice, but there's people who really do want to listen.
Loveisrespect.org also has some material as well as some suggestions, particularly for young people.
Yes, absolutely. Fantastic, fantastic resources. And all of you, unbelievable conversation with you tonight. Thank you so much for being a part of it. For anyone who'd like to join next week, we're going to be delving more into the court process in regards to domestic violence, so feel free to join us. But thank you so much again for joining us here tonight. I cannot tell you how much I appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of your evening.